And we're continuing with chapter 13 of the third part of Silver on the Tree by Susan Cooper. This part is called The Lost Land. This chapter is called The Llwyd, which I am sure that my Welsh is not up to pronouncing the word correctly, since I have only seen it written and not heard it said. Llwyd was a horse skeleton that frightened Bran as a child and came at Will and Bran until they sought protection following the words of the lady. And we'll pick up from there. Will came back into the room, leaving the door open and sunlight shafting in. Was it the dark? Hard to tell. One way or another it must have been some ancient haunting of the lost land woken by the riders, maybe, Bran said thoughtfully. The riders passing. He reached for the saddlebag he had dropped on the rough slate floor and looked inside. Hey, food! You hungry? A bit, Will said. Prowling round the cottage, he peered into the only other room, at the back, but decided from the smell of tatters of ancient hay that had only ever been used for animals. In the main room, the walls were dry stone, heavy chunks of rock and slate fitted together without mortar. There was no furniture of any kind, though a few rough shelves were attached to one wall. It was a far cry from the sophisticated elegance of the city. But as he ran his finger idly along a shelf, Will came upon one unexpected object. A small mirror, set in a heavy oak frame carved with a pattern of leaping fish. He rubbed the dirt from the glass with his sleeve and propped the mirror up on its shelf. Bran came up behind him. Here, cup your hands, boy. Gwion's health food. We have here 2 apples and a big bag of hazelnuts, shelled, mind you. Have some. They taste wonderful. Cheerfully chewing, he looked up and saw Will staring at the mirror. He grimaced. Achi fee, haven't you had enough mirrors for a while? Will scarcely heard. Looking at Bran's reflection in the mirror, he could see another familiar face behind him. Merriman! He cried joyously, whirling around, but behind him he found only Bran, mouth half open, as the cheerful expression on his face changed to alarm. The room was empty, save for the 2 of them. Will looked back in the mirror, and Merriman was still there. The shadowed eyes and the angular face stared at him from behind Bran's puzzled, reflected head. I am here, said Merriman to him out of the mirror. His face was drawn and anxious. With you and yet not with you, and I must tell you that Bran can neither see nor hear me, since he has not yet grown to power. I am not allowed to come to you, Will, or even speak in the ways of the old ones, as Gwion told you. I had only one moment in which to pass through the law of the lost land, and just as that moment came, the craft of the dark caught me back to another time. But we have this crack of an instant. You do well. Be confident. There is nothing you cannot do now, if you try. Oh, dear, Will said. His voice sounded to him small and lost. And suddenly he felt small and lost indeed. What's the matter? Bran said, perplexed. Will did not hear him. Merriman? Are the others all right? Yes, Merriman said somberly. In danger, but all right for now. A panic of loneliness fluttered at the back of Will's mind, yet somehow the memory of the destruction of the nightmare horse helped to keep it at bay. What must we do? He said. Bran was standing very still, staring at him in the mirror without a word. Remember the lady's words, as you have done. There was trust in Merriman's reflected face. Go now, and take care to remember other things you have been told. There in the lost land you can do no more than your best. And remember one thing from me, Will. You may trust Gwion with your lives, as once long ago I trusted him with mine. An affectionate warmth deepened his voice. He gave Will one last hard look. The light will carry you once you return with the sword. Go well, old one, he said. Then he was gone. Will turned aside from the mirror, letting out a long breath. Bran said in a whisper, Was he here? Has he gone? Yes. Why couldn't I see him? Where was he? In the mirror. In the mirror? Bran looked at it fearfully. Glancing down, he found the bag of nuts forgotten in his hands and thrust it at Will. Here, eat. What did Merriman say? Suddenly hungry, Will stuffed his mouth with hazelnuts. That it's certain he can't come to the lost land, he said, muffled. That we have to go alone. Remember things we've been told. Like that, he must mean, he pointed to the writing over the cottage door. And that we can trust Gwion. We knew that already, Bran said. Yes. Will thought of the lean figure with the strong grey-bearded face and the brilliant smile. I wonder who Gwion is and what he is. He is a maker, Bran said unexpectedly. Will paused in his chewing. Oh, what? He is a bard, I would bet. He has the calluses from the harp on his fingertips. But mostly it was the way he spoke of the makers, of all kinds, when he was telling us the king's story with love. And he and Merriman must have gone through great danger together once. Well, I suppose we shall find out sometime. Here. Will turned over the bag of nuts. You have the rest. They are good. Did you say there were apples? One each. Bran passed one over and began rolling up the saddlebag. Will went to the doorway, biting into his apple. It was small, hard, and yellow, but astonishingly sweet and juicy. The heap of white bones lay dead and bleached in the sunlight. He tried not to look at it, but raised his gaze out to the country. Bran, see how close we are! The sun was high, and a blue sky flecked with puffy white clouds. Out over the rough pasture land, perhaps a mile away, a glittering tower rose from a clump of tall trees, and sunlight struck from it so brightly that its brilliance dazzled them. Bran came out. They stood looking at the castle for a long moment. Beyond it, the lost land ended in a flat, shimmering horizon of the blue sea. Will turned from it for a last look at the low, spreading hawthorn tree that grew from the roof of the little house. He stared. The tree that had been covered in milky white blossoms, the enchanted snowstorm to destroy the Merry Llwyd, was thick now with bright red berries clustering about along the branches, brilliant as flame. Bran shook his head in wonder. Both he and Will wordlessly touched the sturdy stone wall of the cottage in an instinctive farewell gesture. Then they set out on foot across the tussocky grass of the pasture toward the glittering pointing tower. And when they looked back once more, the little shielding house, with the tree growing from its roof, they saw no house there at all, but only a thicket of clustering hawthorn bushes, red-berried, growing in an open field. And that's the end of chapter 13.